Whether it's for yourself or for your client, being able to create an animated logo design is a crucial skill for video editors. Now we'll start by looking at what inspired me for today's video, which is a Fiverr commercial. As you can see, their logo animation is contemporary, sleek, and simple, and we can do all these in DaVinci Resolve. Now there are a few different parts. First is these individual character animation that happens one after another. And then we have this dot that gets animated and then morphs to push this last character R here over to the left. And then we have the text start now that comes up, as well as the text box around it that gets animated. So we'll look at how to do all of these in DaVinci Resolve. And to do that, I have a Fusion composition clip right next to it. So let's just take it directly to the Fusion page. We'll start by bringing the text node, and the first thing we're gonna do is to change the font to one that resembles what we saw in the introductory video, which is a soft sans serif font. So I'm gonna go with this one, and now let's just start to putting our first letter here, F, bring up the size a little bit, and then we're going to just copy this node and then paste it 5 more times for each one of the other characters that was used in this text. So this is gonna be I, and the next one is going to be V, so on and so forth. So we're going to just do this for all the text nodes here, and once that is done, now let's go back to the very first one. We're going to start to change up the placement of these characters. So I'm going to push it over to the left a little bit. That's good enough. And now let's go to the next one here. Now for this one, I'm going to make sure that a kind of is placed right next to the first character, because this was what was called for in the original design. So I just want to make sure that I follow that. Now let's just move on to the next one. Now for the letter E here, I'm going to just push out the other 2 letters first before I come back to it. So let's just do that. And now let's come back to this letter letter E here, and then let's just place it right next to V. Now let's move on to the next character, R. And then for the last character, the thing I'm gonna make sure that I do is to leave extra room between the R on the left and this R. And again, the reason is because this was what was used in the original design, and also in the latter part of the animation, we're going to push this one over to the left. So I'm going to just make sure I leave a little bit room here, and that looks pretty good. So to animate these characters, I'm going to use the node multi-poly. So let's just bring that in, and then we're going to connect it to the very first text node here. Now you will see that everything disappears. So we are going to just start by check the invert option there. So now we'll see the letter, and we're going to start from the bottom. I'm going to start kind of in the middle of this character here, and then we're going to just draw a shape around it that best resembles this part of the character. So let's change it to modify only. This will just allow me to make some changes to the placement of these points. So that's good enough. I'm going to also hit this point right here and change it to smooth instead of linear. Again, just so that it resembles the shape of this part of the letter. So once that's done, we're going to uncheck invert, and then we're going to just bring up the border width until it sort of fills up this part of the text. So that looks good enough. Now we are going to just uncheck solid, and then we're going to change the cap style to straight, and then we're going to use the length setting here to control the animation. But all these steps, guys, are pretty much going to be the same steps that we'll follow for all the other character animation. All right, so with that being said, we're going to just set a keyframe here. Make sure we bring it down to 0. Now let's move over 10 frames, and then we're going to just bring the length setting up to 1. And also one thing to note here is that for all the other character animation, I'm going to stick to the 10 frame duration. Now for the second part of this character, we're going to add a polygon in the multi-poly node here. Then let's just check invert first. This will allow us to draw a straight line just right across, and now we are going to change it to modify only. This will allow us to adjust these points a little bit there. Now let's uncheck invert. We're going to bring up the border width until it fills up this part of the letter. Now let's uncheck solid, change cap style to straight. Now, one thing though is that as we start to go back, you see that it's really not that clean. So what I'm gonna do is to just bring down the border width a little bit there, and then start to maybe bring down these points as well until it looks good. So these minor adjustments that you will be making kind of back and forth is just part of the creative process. But I think at this point, this looks pretty good. So what we're gonna do is to now just animate this line here. So we're gonna place it in the middle of this animation, the 5th frame. Now let's keyframe length setting, make sure it's sitting at 0. Now let's end it on the 10th frame, which is where all this animation is going to end. Let's just bring it back up to 1. So now as you can see, guys, this is the animation of our first character here. And basically, this is the process that we'll follow for all the other characters. All right, now let's move on to the second character here. So we're going to project this second text node onto the screen. We're going to once again bring a multi-poly node, make sure it's connected to this text node here. Now let's check invert option. Let's start the drawing from the bottom, and then we're going to end it at the top just for this part of the character. And then we're going to uncheck invert and then start to bring up the border width until it fills this part of this character. Don't worry about the dot at the top, that will be taken care of. So now let's just uncheck solid, and then we're going to change the cap style to straight. And we're going to set a keyframe for the length setting. So make sure that it's sitting at 0. Now, as we start to move over to the 10 by another 10 frames and set a keyframe, one thing you will notice is that this animation seems to be starting from the bottom and the top. But if you remember, in introductory video, it actually starts from the top and it ends at the bottom. So where you're going to start the drawing is going to make a difference. So let's go back, just restart this. We are actually this time going to start from the top. So let's just do that. And then we're going to end the drawing at the bottom here, at the bottom of this part of the letter. Now let's just change it to modify only. We're going to adjust the placement of these dots here. And then we're going to uncheck invert. And now let's start to bring up the border width. And once again, don't worry about the dot at the top there. That will be taken care of soon. So we're going to then just uncheck solid. Once that looks good, change the cap style. And then now we are going to put a keyframe here on the length setting. Make sure it's sitting at 0. Now let's move over 10 frames. And then we're going to bring the length setting back up to 1. So now, as you can see, if we project this merge node onto the screen, and looks exactly like what we saw in the introductory video. And one lesson here is just to remember that where you're going to start the drawing is going to have impact. All right, so now let's move on to the next character V here. We are going to bring in a multi-poly node once again, and we are going to, well, first of all, just check invert, and then we're going to start with the left side of this character. Let's just draw the line, but I'm going to place it actually a little bit to the left because there's more room for error on the left-hand side. So once that is done, let's just uncheck invert, and then we're going to start to bring up the border width until it fills up this part of the letter there. Now that looks pretty good. Let's uncheck solid, change cap style. Now if you look at the combine effect, I want this to start kind of right before the eye character animation ends. So we're going to just hit a keyframe for length setting, make sure bring it down to 0, and let's move over about 5 frames, and then we're going to bring it up to 1. Okay, so that looks pretty good, but there are some imperfections here, so we're going to just simply bring these points a little bit further. That will immediately fix it. Okay, so that looks solid. We are now going to just move on to the second part of this character. So once again, it's going to be the same process. We're going to add a polygon here in the multi-poly node, and we're going to start from the bottom and then end at the top. So let's just check, make sure that we check invert and then uncheck, and then we're going to bring up the border width, and then let's also uncheck solid, change cap style, and then we're going to set a keyframe for the length setting here. Then let's move over 5 more frames, and then we're going to make sure that the length setting is at 1. So now you will see that we have this kind of staggered animation. Then this is exactly what was called for in the original design. So this looks pretty good. Okay, so now let's move on to the next character, E, and once again we are going to bring in a multi-poly node, and we will break this up into 2 parts. So for the first part, let's just check invert. We're going to just draw a straight line here for the line that kind of goes in the middle of this letter, and let's just uncheck invert, start to bring up the border width there. Let's change it to modify only, and then we're going to adjust the points a little bit, change the border width until it looks good. Okay, now let's uncheck solid. Let's just change the cap style. Now, in terms of where I want this to start, where I want this to begin, let's actually go back about 4 frames. So I think that's a good starting point. Now let's keyframe length setting, make sure that it's sitting at 0. Now let's just move over about 3 frames, and then we're going to bring this length setting back up to 1. Okay guys, so now let's move on to the second part of this character, and we're going to use actually B-spline for that. And the reason is just because, as you will see, that B-spline by nature, the points are curved, so I don't have to, so it's going to just go very well with the shape of this character. All right, so now let's just make sure it's modify only and adjust the points a little bit, make sure it's kind of sitting in the middle, and let's just uncheck invert, start to bring up the border width. You will see that it just beautifully kind of fits this character. Now let's uncheck solid, change cap style. But one thing I'm noticing here is that there's a bit of a crack there at the bottom. So let's just simply just drag this point down a little bit. Okay, there we go. So that about to fix it. So we are going to now just hit a keyframe for length setting, make sure it's sitting at 0. And let's move over about 7 frames and then just bring the length setting back up to 1. So if we look at the combined effect, guys, at this point, you will see once again, it's a stagger. So the animation for this character E here is starting kind of before the character V ends. So yeah, that's kind of the effect that we're going for here. Now moving on to the next character R, we are going to once again bring a multi-poly node, and we'll also break this up into 2 parts. So for the first part here, we are going to just check invert first, and now let's start the drawing for the vertical part of this letter here, and then let's uncheck invert, start to bring up the border width. You will notice that I am placing this line a little bit over to the left just because there's a little bit more room for error on the left hand side of this character. Okay, so that looks pretty decent. We are now going to just uncheck solid, and then we're going to change the cap style. Now in terms of where I want this to start, let's actually go back about 6 frames this time. So now let's just keyframe the length setting here, make sure that it's sitting at 0, and then let's just move over about, I would say 7 frames, and then we're just going to bring it back up to 1. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now let's move on to the second part of this letter. Now we're going to add a polygon here in the multi-poly node, and once again, let's check invert. And then we're going to just draw this shape here, draw a line through the middle of this part of this letter. Now let's change it to modify only. And for this point in the middle here, I'm also going to change it to smooth, just so that it resembles kind of more to the shape of this letter. Okay, so now let's just bring out the border width. That looks pretty good. And then we're going to just uncheck solid, and we're going to just change the cap style. But you will notice a little bit of imperfection there at the beginning. So we're going to simply just change this point's angle, and I think that looks great. All right, so that fixes it. Great. And now in terms of animation, we're going to make sure that we set a keyframe for length setting, make sure it's 0, and move over about 3 frames, and we're just going to bring it back up to 1. Okay, so if you look at the combined effect, you guys, you see that once again, this is going to be a stagger animation, but this time around, this R animation is going to start about 6 frames before the end of the letter E animation. So yeah, so this looks pretty good. And now we're going to just finish up with the last character. So let's just bring in the multi-poly node, and once again, we will break this up into 2 parts. So the first part is going to be the vertical part of this character, and the process is going to be exactly the same. So I am going to just speed up this part of the video a little bit here. Now, one thing I will call out is the timing of the animation. So I will go back about 6 frames before the end of the other R. So this is a good starting point, the 32nd frame. Let's make sure that we keyframe the length setting, and then we'll move over about 7 frames once again, and then we're going to bring it back up to 1. Okay, so now let's just finish up with the second part of this letter. So let's add a polygon, and again, I'm going to speed up this part because it's exactly the same as the other one. Okay, so now once this is done, if we look at the combined effect, you guys, you will see that this looks really good. You know, we have the stagger animation happening happening between each character, and that's exactly what we saw in the introductory video as well. And the best part is that this is, the most time consuming part of this entire animation, and we're pretty much done. So now what we're going to do is to add some movement to these characters, and we're going to start with the character V. So I'm going to find the beginning of this animation here, and then let's just click this node, and then we're going to just click on the transform node. That will automatically plug it right after. So now let's set a keyframe for the center setting here. Let's move over 10 frames, and then we're going to set another keyframe, and then we're going to go back to the first keyframe here. We're going to just push it over to the right a little bit. 0.57 is a very good starting point. Okay, so now let's just bring up the spline editor, and all we're gonna do here is just to change the interpolation a little bit there. And so now if we have a look, you guys will see that we have some movement to this letter V. So that looks really good. Okay, cool. So we are going to just move on to the next character. So let's find the beginning of the animation here for letter E, and we're going to once again just bring that transform node, set a keyframe there, move over 10 frames, and then we're going to set another keyframe, go back to the first one, make sure that it starts at 0.57, and bring up the spline editor and then change the ease in and ease out. Once this is done, so now we have movement for the letter V as well as the letter E, and we're just gonna move on to the other two letters, guys. I'm going to just speed up a little bit more here because the process is exactly the same. And once this is done, you guys will see that not only do we have the individual character animation, but also we have some movement to them as well. So things are coming along pretty well. Now let's add a transform node after all of these individual animation here. So we're going to create some movement for this entire text. So let's set a keyframe for the center character at the beginning of this video. Then let's move over about 24 frames, and we're going to set another keyframe here. Go back to the first one. We're going to push this over to the right a bit, and I think 0.6 is a pretty good start, so we're going to leave it at that. Now let's bring up the spline editor, and we're going to change the interpolation there a little bit. And once that is done, and you guys will see that not only do we have movement on individual characters, we also have some movement for this entire text, and that's exactly what we saw in the introductory video. Now we can make some minor adjustments to these ease in, ease out, just to kind of make the movement a little bit smoother. So you see that that looks way much better. And now we are ready to move on to the shape animation. So the first thing we need to do here is to determine the timing of the animation. So I'm gonna find the last character R here, and then go back about 5 frames, and that's a good starting point. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is to just go to shape, and then bring in S ellipse node as well as an S render node, and then we're going to make sure that it's plugged back to the transform node as a foreground. Okay, so now let's just focus on the S ellipse node there. And the first thing we're going to do is to right click the width setting, in the menu select expression, and then make sure that it's connected to the height setting here. So now let's just adjust the height setting. Now let's just go to style, change color to purple, and then we're going to go back to the controls tab there. Let's set a keyframe for the height setting, and then we're going to move over about 5 frames, and then we're going to just set another keyframe there, go back to the first one, let's bring it down to 0. So now as you can see, this is our shape animation, and if we go to the merge 6 node here, we're going to just bring down the size a little bit and then place it at the bottom right corner of the last character there. So that looks like a good place, and you will see that as the last character finishes its animation, our shape animation will also finish as well, so they sync up perfectly. Now, one other thing we need to do is the shape morph. So to do that, we are going to leverage the grid warp node. So let's place that after the S render node, and now we're ready to get going with some morphing. So to execute this property, we are going to first of all change the preview screen into a dual screen. So now we can project the grid warp node onto the left hand screen here. And the first thing we're going to do is to change the magnet type to selected, and then we're going to bring the X grip size setting all the way up, and then change the Y grip size all the way down. Okay, so now to animate this, we're going to just set a keyframe for right click here for mesh animation, move over about 10 frames, and then we're going to set a keyframe here by selecting all these points on the screen, hold down the shift key, and then move them over to the left until this little dot starts to kind of get into the last character R there. And then this will automatically set a keyframe for this animation. Now let's come to the middle of this animation here. What we're gonna do is just select the first half of this of all these points, and then we're going to once again hold down the shift key, and then we're going to push this over to the left until it gets into that last character there. So that's a good stopping point for this animation. So now if we have a look, you guys, you see that we have this shape morph pretty much completed. And now we need to come to the middle of this animation here and then go to the transform node for the last character R there. And then we're going to set a keyframe for the center setting and then move over about 5 frames and then push it over to the left until it touches the other R. So now if we have a look at this combined effect, you see that this shape morph is going to happen and then push this character R over to the left. So this looks really good. Okay, so moving on, we're going to go back to shape. Let's bring an S rectangle node as well as an S render, and then we're going to connect this back to merge as a foreground. So let's go to S rectangle here. We are going to just adjust the size a little bit so that it fits right under the text here. Okay, now we are going to just bring corner radius setting all the way up to 1. Now let's go ahead and bring our text. So let's use the S text node, and we're also going to bring an S Boolean node and then plug that right after S rectangle. But before we connect S text back to S Boolean, we're going to just look at this S text node first. Let's just write our text, which is start now, and then we're going to just bring the size down a little bit there. Now let's just look at this overall effect, and then we're going to just move this text to the middle of this text box here. That's perfect. Let's connect the S text node to S Boolean. And now if we go to the S text node and we go to the layout tab, when you see that when we bring this text down, it will get cut off by the S rectangle node, which is perfect. Okay, so now at this point, let's go ahead and set a keyframe for the center setting in the S text node, and we're going to just move over about 10 frames, and then we're going to just set another keyframe there. Now let's go back to the first one. Let's start to bring this down until this text gets completely cut off by the S rectangle node. Okay, so now that's our text animation there, but we are still missing the text box. So to do that, we are just going to copy the S rectangle node here and then paste it. And then we're going to connect this new S rectangle node back to S Boolean as a foreground here. So what we're gonna do is to first of all uncheck solid, and then we're going to just bring up the border width setting there a little bit. Okay, so that's perfect. But the only thing we still need to do is to animate the text box. So that is what we're gonna look at next. So let's come to the S rectangle node here. Let's set a keyframe for the width setting, and then let's move over a few frames. That is keyframe for the width setting again. Let's go back to the first one and then just bring it down to 0. So now you see that this is pretty good, but I'm not too happy with the timing. So what I'm gonna do is just to move over a few more frames and then just to set a keyframe for the width setting. And let's go back to the previous one and then delete it. So now you see that this is a little bit better, but the timing is still a little bit off. So what I'm gonna do is to just bring up the spline editor there, and we're going to just select the last keyframe and then just move it back 2 more keyframes. Okay, so this is looking way much better. So I'm gonna stick with this, but one problem though is that the text itself is still not masked. So to do that, we're gonna go back to the original S rectangle node here. We're gonna set a keyframe for the width setting, and let's move over about 8 frames, and then we're going to just set a keyframe for the width setting, and then let's go back to the first one. Let's bring it down to 0. So now as you can see that we have our text perfectly masked, and we also have the text box animation as well. But one thing is still missing, which is that sort of sudden change for the text to change color and the text box to change to solid fill. To do that, we're gonna go to the S Boolean first, go to style, and then set a keyframe here for color, and then just move over one frame and then change the color to black. So that's the color change for the text. Now let's go to this new S rectangle node here, and then just go back one frame, and then we're going to set a keyframe for the solid option, and just move over one more frame, and then make sure that it's solid is checked. So now you're gonna see that if we look at the combined effect, we have this sudden change for the text to change color from white to black, and then for the text box to go from just the border to a solid fill. And you guys, this is pretty much it. Okay, actually one last thing, we're going to just plug in a transform node after everything else, and all we're gonna do here is to set a keyframe for the center setting, move over a few more frames, and then we're just going to push it up, push this entire animation up the screen just a little bit, and then we're going to come to the spline editor here, and then we're going to just change the easing and also the ease out. And once this is done, you guys, if we have a look at this overall effect, you see that we have everything pretty much animated, all these little I think we've captured very well all these different components of this local design. So if we go back to the edit page here, well, first of all, let's just look at the original animation one more time. Pay attention to all these little details, how that works with the overall animation. And then we're going to look at ours. You will see that I think we've done a really good job capturing that. So hope you learned a lot from this tutorial. I hope this can help you with your logo design, logo animation for yourself or for your client. And as always, I will see you next time.